4 weeks. That is all it took. 4 weeks after Angus MacGregor started using the plant his grandmother had pressed into his hands as a boy, the joint pain that had gripped his knees and fingers every single morning for over a decade was no longer waking him before sunrise. Angus MacGregor, 78 years old, born and raised in the Scottish Highlands, has never taken a prescription painkiller. Not one. In a world where arthritis affects roughly 350 million people globally, and where the pharmaceutical industry generates over $25 billion a year from arthritis medications alone, that is either a remarkable coincidence, or it is evidence of something the industry would rather you did not examine too closely. Angus's family has maintained a working knowledge of Celtic medicinal plants for over 300 years. His grandmother could identify 47 wild plants by touch alone. His great-great-grandmother prepared remedies that their community in Ross-shire relied on when no doctor was within 30 miles. That knowledge was nearly lost. Nearly. Most people assume that ancient herbal remedies are what you fall back on when modern medicine fails, a kind of desperate last resort. But the research coming out of institutions like the NIH and peer-reviewed journals, including those indexed on PubMed, is beginning to suggest something entirely different, that for certain conditions, particularly chronic joint inflammation, some of these plants were working through mechanisms that pharmaceutical science is only now learning to target. For this video, over 40 published clinical studies and pharmacological reviews were examined, including trials from European research centres and data submitted to the Cochrane database, to verify exactly what Angus's family plant can and cannot do. But here is the question that none of those studies fully answer on their own. Why did a specific preparation method, passed down through one Scottish family, produce results that a standard commercial supplement of the same plant did not? The plant is real, the evidence is real, and the preparation method Angus uses, the exact one, step by step, is in this video. To understand why Angus MacGregor's story matters, you have to understand what happened to communities like his in the 1950s and 60s. Before the full expansion of the National Health Service into rural Scotland, village herbalists, women mostly, passing knowledge down through families, were the primary source of relief for chronic conditions. Joint pain, swelling, the slow grinding deterioration of cartilage that we now call osteoarthritis. These women knew plants. They knew timing, preparation, concentration. Then came the prescription model, standardized, scalable, profitable. By the mid-1960s, the rural herbalist had been replaced in most Scottish communities by a single GP covering 50 square miles, a prescription pad, and medications manufactured in facilities that had no interest in what grew along the riverbanks of Ross-shire. The average UK arthritis patient today spends approximately £9,000 per year between NHS costs and personal expenditure, managing a condition that in many cases ancient Celtic plant traditions addressed with something you can grow in a window box. This is not a romanticised argument against modern medicine. Angus MacGregor is careful about that. He has had a hip X-ray. He sees his GP. He understands the difference between structural joint damage that requires surgery and chronic systemic inflammation that responds to botanical compounds. But what he also understands, and what his family has understood for generations, is that there is a specific plant growing across the British Isles and Northern Europe that contains compounds now verified in clinical trials to reduce inflammatory markers in joint tissue. A plant so common most people have brushed past it on a country walk and cursed it for the sting it left on their arm. The villain in this story is not pharmaceutical companies. The villain is forgetting. The active, systematic forgetting of knowledge that was effective, accessible, and free. and the cost of that forgetting is measured in the daily pain of millions of people who were never told that a proven option existed in the hedgerow. The plant is Urtica dioica, the stinging nettle. You know it. Everyone who has ever walked through a British field in summer knows it. The sharp, almost electrical sting on exposed skin. The white wheal that rises within seconds. That sting is not a flaw. It is, in a very real sense, the mechanism. Roman soldiers stationed at Hadrian's Wall, that cold, wind-battered frontier in northern Britain, reportedly rubbed nettles directly onto their legs to generate circulation and warmth. There are written records of this practice dating back over 2,000 years. The Roman physician Pliny the Elder documented the nettle's use for joint conditions in his encyclopedic work Naturalis Historia. What the Romans were doing by instinct, modern biochemistry has now confirmed by measurement. Researchers have identified 17 distinct anti-inflammatory compounds in Urtica dioica leaf extract. Among the most significant are beta-cytosterol, caffeic acid, and a flavonoid called quercetin, all of which interfere with the body's production of prostaglandins and leukotrienes, which are the primary chemical signals that drive joint inflammation. This is not vague, this is molecular. When your immune system over-responds to cartilage wear and triggers a cascade of inflammatory chemicals, the same cascade that makes your knees stiff at 5 a.m. and your fingers slow to close around a cup, compounds in nettle leaf work at the cellular level to interrupt that cascade. A 2013 study published in Phytotherapy Research examined nettle leaf extract against a placebo in patients with osteoarthritis of the knee. Participants reported a significant reduction in pain scores within 6 weeks. A separate trial found that nettle extract reduced the required dose of diclofenac, a common anti-inflammatory drug, by 50% while maintaining the same level of pain relief. But Angus MacGregor's grandmother did not use a standardized extract. She did not measure in milligrams. She used a preparation that has been refined across generations, and according to Angus, it produces results that commercial nettle supplements have never matched. The difference lies in how the plant is prepared, and when. His grandmother's name was Mary MacGregor. She was born in Rossshire in 1901, the daughter of a crofter and the granddaughter of a woman who had learned plant medicine from her own mother in the mid-1800s. Mary never had a formal education beyond primary school. She never read a biochemistry paper. What she had was 30 years of observation and a community that depended on her judgment. Angus remembers the summer of 1960. He was 14 years old. He had been experiencing pain in both knees after a growth spurt, a deep aching stiffness that made climbing the stone walls of their croft feel like punishment. His father assumed it was growing pains and told him to get on with it. His grandmother took him to the river's edge, cut a handful of young nettle stems with a cloth wrapped around her hand, and brought them back to her kitchen. She did not make a tea. She prepared something Angus calls a strong drawing infusion, a method distinctly different from the light teas most people associate with herbal remedies. The distinction matters, and Angus still makes it the same way today. Within 3 days, the stiffness in his knees had reduced noticeably. Within 2 weeks, it was gone. He did not connect it immediately. He was 14, not a scientist. But Mary told him plainly, "The nettle is working on what is making your joints tight." She said it in Gaelic, and the phrase carried the confidence of inherited certainty. 30 years later, when Angus developed what his GP confirmed was early-stage osteoarthritis in both hands, he remembered those words. He began the same preparation. 4 weeks later, not 2 weeks, not 6, but 4. The morning stiffness that had gripped his fingers since his early 50s had reduced by what he estimates at around 70%. These stories deserve to be heard and preserved. If you believe this kind of knowledge belongs to everyone, subscribe to this channel. Every week, Angus shares what his family learned across 3 centuries, with the science to back it up. The science did not come looking for stinging nettle. Researchers stumbled into it. In the late 1990s, a German research group investigating the mechanisms of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs began testing plant compounds that appeared to work through similar pathways. Nettle leaf extract appeared in their data for an unexpected reason. It was suppressing a protein complex called NFKB, nuclear factor kappa B, which is essentially the master switch of the body's inflammatory response. When NFKB activates, it triggers the production of at least 50 pro-inflammatory genes simultaneously. Diclofenac, ibuprofen, naproxen, they all work in part by modulating this same pathway. So does nettle. The 2013 phytotherapy research study specifically tracked patients with knee osteoarthritis over 6 weeks. Those taking nettle leaf extract reported statistically significant reductions in pain and stiffness compared to the placebo group. Crucially, a separate trial found that when nettle extract was combined with a low dose of diclofenac, patients achieved the same pain relief as a full dose of diclofenac alone, meaning the nettle effectively reduced the required drug dose by 50%. That has enormous implications. NSAIDs, like diclofenac, carry real risks at full doses: gastric bleeding, increased cardiovascular events, kidney stress. A 50% dose reduction is not a minor footnote. For a patient taking diclofenac daily for years, it could be the difference between a functional gut and a bleeding ulcer. The Arthritis Foundation's own supplement guide, updated as recently as December 2025, lists stinging nettle among botanicals with documented evidence for arthritis symptom management. The recommended dose for capsule form is up to 1,300 mg per day. For tea, 3 cups daily. For tincture, 1 to 4 milliliters 3 times a day. Angus's preparation is none of these. It is older, more concentrated, and prepared at a temperature and timing that he learned from Myri, and that, as it turns out, aligns precisely with what modern extraction chemistry tells us about the optimal conditions for preserving nettle's most active compounds. The science is catching up. The hedgerow has been ahead of it for centuries. To understand why the nettle works, you need to understand what is happening inside a joint at 4 and 5 in the morning. The hour that arthritis sufferers know better than any other. While you sleep, your body reduces its production of cortisol, your natural internal anti-inflammatory hormone. At the same time, your immune system becomes more active. In a joint already compromised by arthritis, this creates a window of elevated inflammatory activity. Your synovial fluid, the liquid that lubricates every joint, keeps cartilage surfaces from grinding directly against each other, becomes thicker and less effective. The joint space narrows under the pressure of swelling. The lining of the joint, the synovium, produces excess fluid in an attempt to protect itself, which creates the swollen, tight sensation that makes the first steps of the morning feel like walking on broken glass. The key molecule driving this process is a protein called TNF-alpha, tumor necrosis factor alpha. It is a cytokine, a chemical messenger that tells the body's immune cells to maintain their inflammatory attack on joint tissue. In rheumatoid arthritis, this attack is the disease itself. In osteoarthritis, it is the body's misguided over-response to normal cartilage wear. Either way, TNF-alpha is the accelerant. Quercetin, one of the flavonoids found in high concentrations in stinging nettle leaf, has been shown in multiple studies to significantly suppress TNF-alpha production. It also inhibits mast cell activation, which is one of the first steps in the inflammatory cascade. In plain terms, quercetin interrupts the process before it fully starts. This is why timing matters. Angus takes his preparation in the evening, not because Myri said so, though she did, but because suppressing inflammatory signals during the night directly targets the window when arthritis pain builds to its morning peak. His grandmother could not have explained NFKB inhibition. She had no laboratory, no electron microscope. What she had was 3 generations of observation of what worked and what didn't. She had noticed, empirically, precisely, that evening preparation and evening consumption produced better results. She was right. Here is the preparation, exactly as Angus makes it, exactly as Mary made it before him. First, the plant material, always young leaves, the top 4 to 6 leaves of a nettle stem that has not yet flowered. Mary was insistent on this. She said the old leaves were too harsh, the lower stems too woody. The young leaves, she explained, carry the most strength, and she was correct. Young nettle leaves contain significantly higher concentrations of quercetin and caffeic acid than mature leaves. The plant allocates its active compounds defensively to the tender new growth most vulnerable to being eaten. Collect fresh if possible. Angus prefers the period between late March and early June in Scotland, before the plant flowers. Wear gloves. Collect a good 2 packed handfuls. Second, the water temperature. This is where commercial preparations go wrong. Most nettle teas are made with fully boiling water, 100 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, quercetin begins to degrade rapidly. A 2017 study in the Journal of Food Science confirmed that quercetin retains maximum bioavailability when extracted in water at temperatures between 60 and 70 degrees Celsius. Mary never boiled the preparation. She waited for the water to stop speaking, her phrase for the moment when a pan comes off the boil and the bubbling quiets. That is approximately 70 degrees. Never above 70 degrees Celsius. Mary did not know the chemistry. She knew the outcome. The preparation made with cooler water simply worked better. She had tested both, empirically, across years. What she preserved by instinct, food scientists confirmed by instrument a half-century later. Third, the steeping time, 20 minutes covered. The cover matters. Volatile aromatic compounds in nettle, including some of the caffeic acid derivatives, evaporate with steam. A lid keeps them in the liquid where they can be consumed. Fourth, strain through muslin, not a metal filter which can react with the plant acids, and drink the full cup in the evening between 7 and 9 o'clock. 1 cup per day, not 3. 1 strong cup made correctly is worth more than 3 weak ones made carelessly. Angus made this preparation every evening for 4 weeks. By the end of the 2nd week, the morning stiffness in his hands had shifted, less severe, shorter duration. By the end of week 4, he could close his fist completely by 6 in the morning. He had not been able to do that in 3 years. Angus is not asking anyone to take his word alone. He tracked his progress using a grip strength dynamometer, the same tool physiotherapists use to measure hand function, purchased from a medical supplier for £18. He logged his readings every morning at the same time, 6:30, before getting out of bed. At baseline, day 1, his dominant hand registered 14 kilograms of grip force. The clinical average for a healthy man his age is between 24 and 30 kilograms. He was at roughly half that. At the end of week 2, he measured 17 kilograms. A modest improvement, but consistent. At the end of week 4, 21 kilograms. Still below the age average, but no longer in the clinical range for significant functional impairment. And the morning stiffness, the subjective experience that had made those first minutes of every day feel like a negotiation with his own hands, had reduced to something he describes as a brief reminder, not a sentence. He took these results to his GP in Inverness, a doctor who, to her credit, asked to see the preparation method. She noted that his self-reported improvement was consistent with what clinical trials showed for nettle leaf extract. She did not recommend he stop. She told him to continue monitoring. What matters about Angus's documentation is not that it constitutes clinical proof. It doesn't. A single self-reported case is a data point, not a trial. What it constitutes is a controlled personal experiment, conducted methodically, producing results that align precisely with what published research predicts. The family preparation, refined across 300 years of observation, had landed, by accumulated empirical wisdom, on a method that a modern laboratory would have designed from first principles. You've stayed through the evidence and the preparation method, and you know that this knowledge nearly disappeared entirely. If these plants deserve more attention, subscribe to this channel. There are 17 more plants in this family's archive, and this is only the beginning. Angus MacGregor is 78 years old and has no intention of burying the cautions in the small print at the end. He states them directly because his grandmother did the same. Stinging nettle is not appropriate for everyone. The Arthritis Foundation's own guidance, and the clinical literature, identifies several categories of people who must exercise caution or avoid it entirely. The most serious interaction is with anticoagulants, blood thinners like warfarin. Nettle has been shown to affect platelet aggregation and can potentiate the effects of blood-thinning medication, increasing bleeding risk. If you are on any anticoagulant therapy, do not add nettle to your routine without speaking to your prescribing doctor first. Second, blood pressure medication. Nettle has a mild but measurable diuretic and hypotensive effect. In someone already managing blood pressure with medication, this can produce an additive effect that drops pressure lower than intended. Monitor carefully and again, speak to your doctor. Third, type 2 diabetes management. Nettle has demonstrated the ability to lower blood sugar in multiple studies. For someone managing diabetes with medication, this could interfere with glucose control in unpredictable ways. Angus himself is on no regular medication. His GP monitors his blood pressure annually, his kidney function is normal for his age, and he has no clotting disorders. The preparation is, for him, appropriate. That does not mean it is appropriate for every person watching this video. The maximum safe daily dose in capsule form, as recommended by the Arthritis Foundation, is up to 1,300 milligrams. The MacGregor infusion, using 2 packed handfuls of fresh young leaves per cup, is at the stronger end of the therapeutic range. This is not a gentle wellness tea. It is a pharmacologically active preparation. Treat it with the respect due to anything that actually works. Consult your GP. Bring this video if it helps. A doctor who dismisses the clinical evidence without reviewing it is doing you a disservice. Nettle is the beginning. It is the plant Angus uses daily, the one with the deepest clinical backing, the one his grandmother reached for first. But Mary MacGregor's knowledge did not begin and end with a single plant. She worked with 17 plants in total, what Angus calls the active archive, as distinct from the broader inventory of plants she could identify and describe. 17 plants, each with a specific use, a specific preparation, and now, increasingly, a specific body of peer-reviewed research beginning to confirm what she knew by inheritance. One of the most intriguing is meadowsweet, Filipendula ulmaria, a plant with small cream-white flowers that grows in damp meadows and riverbanks across Scotland and Ireland. Meadowsweet contains salicylates, the same family of compounds from which aspirin was derived. The pharmaceutical chemist Felix Hoffmann, working at Bayer in 1897, synthesized acetyl salicylic acid partly inspired by compounds already being documented in meadowsweet. The plant was there first. The pill came later. Another is bogbean, Menanthes trifoliata, which grows in the boggy, peaty wetlands of the Scottish Highlands. Myrie used it specifically for the kind of deep, cold weather joint ache that arrived in October and did not leave until April. Traditional use of bogbean for arthritis and rheumatism is documented across northern Europe going back to the 16th century. Laboratory studies have identified it as containing compounds with genuine anti-inflammatory and analgesic activity, though clinical trials remain limited. Angus has lived with these plants his whole life. He is careful not to overclaim. Some of the 17 have robust evidence. Others have promising preliminary data. A few have only the evidence of his family's use across generations, and he says so clearly for each one. There is one plant in the archive, not the nettle, not the meadowsweet, that Angus considers the most surprising. A plant almost nobody connects with joint pain, growing in almost every garden in Britain, eaten regularly, and yet carrying anti-inflammatory compounds that rival prescription-strength NSAIDs in early laboratory testing. That plant comes in a future video on this channel. The archive is open. In 2021, a research team at Amsterdam University Medical Centers ran a clinical trial they called Plants for Joints. It was an 8-week structured lifestyle intervention based on whole plant foods and specific anti-inflammatory botanical compounds targeted at patients with both osteoarthritis and rheumatoid arthritis. The results, published in RMD Open, a peer-reviewed rheumatology journal, showed meaningful reductions in disease activity, pain scores, and inflammatory biomarkers across both patient groups. The researchers noted carefully that this was a lifestyle intervention, not a single supplement. Context mattered. What is striking about the Plants for Joints trial is not just the results. It is what the researchers had to acknowledge in their methodology. They were essentially designing from first principles what communities like Angus MacGregor's had been practicing for generations. The emphasis on whole plant consumption, the attention to preparation and timing, the integration of plant-based intervention into daily rhythm rather than a single pill dose. Empirical knowledge accumulated over generations is a form of clinical trial that the scientific establishment is only recently learning to read. The sample size is a whole community. The duration is centuries. The outcome measurement is survival and quality of life. It is messier than a randomized controlled trial. But it is not nothing. It is, in many cases, a filter for what is worth running the RCT on at all. Angus does not claim that his family's knowledge is infallible. Myri was wrong about some things. He says that readily. She believed that harvesting at a full moon improved potency, for instance, and he has found no evidence for that. What she was not wrong about, consistently, were the plants that worked and the preparations that made them work. 300 years of observation, tested against the bodies of real people living through real winters in the Scottish Highlands, has a kind of honesty in it. The preparations that failed simply stopped being used. The ones that kept working were passed down. What the MacGregor archive represents is a survival-filtered knowledge base, imperfect, incomplete, but pointing repeatedly in directions that laboratory science is now following. Here is the answer to the question that opened this video, the question that clinical studies alone could not answer. Why does Angus's preparation outperform a commercial nettle supplement containing the same plant? The word is bioavailability. How much of an active compound your body actually absorbs and uses, rather than simply ingests and excretes. Commercial nettle supplements are typically dried at high temperatures, sometimes above 100 degrees Celsius, to produce shelf-stable powder. At those temperatures, quercetin degrades. Studies in food chemistry consistently show that 60 to 80% of active quercetin is destroyed by industrial drying and encapsulation processes that use heat above 80 degrees. What goes into the capsule and what your gut actually absorbs are meaningfully different quantities. The MacGregor preparation uses fresh or gently air-dried leaves, water never above 70 degrees, and a covered steep of 20 minutes. It preserves the polyphenol matrix, the quercetin, the caffeic acid, the beta-cytosterol, in a water-soluble form that the gut lining can absorb efficiently. Traditional preparations in water are, in fact, close to optimal for polyphenol bioavailability. The gut absorbs polyphenols from aqueous solutions far more efficiently than from powdered capsule form. And then the timing. Taken in the evening, it reaches peak blood concentration during the night, directly targeting the inflammatory window between midnight and 6 a.m., when arthritis pain builds to its morning crescendo. A commercial supplement taken with breakfast works against this biology. The MacGregor preparation works with it. Mary never read a paper on circadian inflammatory rhythms. She observed over decades that her preparation worked better in the evening. She passed that observation down with the same certainty she gave the temperature of the water, and she was right on both counts. Consider what Angus MacGregor was able to close his fist around on the morning of day 28. Not just a cup. 3 centuries of women who noticed, remembered, and refused to let the knowledge disappear. What the MacGregor preparation demonstrates, and what this video has shown step by step, is that the gap between ancient observation and modern science is far narrower than the pharmaceutical industry has any interest in admitting. The implication is concrete. The question for arthritis sufferers is no longer whether plant-based intervention can work. The clinical evidence settles that. The real question is whether the preparation is correct. A nettle supplement bought from a health food shelf, dried at industrial temperatures and swallowed with breakfast, is a different thing from 2 handfuls of young spring leaves, steeped covered for 20 minutes in water that has stopped boiling, drunk in the evening before the inflammatory window opens. Same plant. Different outcome. The difference is Mary MacGregor and the 300 years of women who stood in that kitchen before her. What this changes is how you look at the hedgerow. The next time you brush past a nettle on a country walk and feel that instant sharp sting rise on your arm, know that what stung you contains 17 verified anti-inflammatory compounds, has been used therapeutically for over 2,000 years, and was nearly forgotten because it could not be patented. Angus MacGregor is 78 years old. He walks the hills above his home in Rossshire every morning. He makes his preparation every evening, and his grandmother Mary, who could identify 47 plants by touch in the dark, is not forgotten. Subscribe to this channel before you leave. There are 16 more plants in the MacGregor archive, each one with a story, a preparation method, and the science that explains why it works. This knowledge came close to disappearing. Your subscription is part of why it won't.